Hey there, friends. My name is Jonathan Page. I am the Director of Connectional Ministries for Innovation and Creativity, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Before Conference Conversations. This is a video podcast that goes through all of the legislative committees that are meeting at the upcoming United Methodist General Conference that's taking place April 23rd through May 3rd of 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina. And today we are going to be focusing on the Higher Education and Superintendency Legislative Committee. And so it's my joy to be able to welcome Rhonda VanDyke and Andrew Kissell, who are going to guide our conversation today. Hey, y'all, how are you doing?
Great.
Hey, Jonathan. Hey, Andrew.
Good to be together. So as we're getting started, Andrew, we'll kind of start with you here. The work of General Conference, you're a layperson, you're a part of the Coastal Virginia District Community United Methodist Church. I served a church not too far from Community when I was first out of seminary, and certainly know that area well. I'm curious for you, Andrew, what is it about General Conference that has you eager or called to this work? What's your calling to the work of General Conference?
Well, I'm very interested in the work we're doing towards inclusion, and largely that started with me with the work I've done with the United Methodist Men, particularly with race and with women, gender, and so seeing the commonality of inclusion across that plus LGBTQ plus disabilities, I just said, yeah, this is a good place for me to contribute.
Great, thank you, Andrew. How about you, Rhonda? What this is now, and I should mention, Andrew, I think this is your first General Conference session.
Oh no, don't tell me that. Yeah, it sure is. It is.
But Rhonda, you're a veteran of this work. This is not your first time to General Conference. So I'm curious for you, kind of talk about your calling to this work and maybe how it's a continued calling for you.
My first General Conference I attended was in 1980. I was a seminary student, and a bunch of us crammed into a very small car and drove to Indianapolis. And I was fascinated to be an observer and to kind of see the skeletal system, I guess, the scaffolding on which a vital denomination lives and moves and has its being. I was, I think, a reserve delegate in about 92 and then was elected in 96. So I've had the pleasure of seeing most of these and honestly thought, okay, it is time. It is time for some younger, fresher eyes on this. And I'm glad that we have that in the Virginia delegation. But my call to this came out of community. There were some folks who came to me when they heard me say, I think it's time for some others, and said, can you let us decide that? As someone with a track record for inclusion, do you mind making yourself available? And if in fact you're elected, find a way to leverage some of your previous experience to empower an emerging generation of leaders. And of course, the answer to that was yes.
That's beautiful. I will reserve comment on what I was up to in 1980, and I'm very, very grateful for your diligence in serving the church for such an amazing period of time, and certainly I'm one of those people that has benefited from your leadership and just your mentoring in not only this process but in so many arenas within the United Methodist Church. So I'm grateful for that, Rhonda, and grateful for both of you accepting a call to be a delegate to General Conference. And so elections happen.
Before you move on, I have to say, put the framing into your heart and head that you are doing this work this time with such care and such heart on behalf of not only the church that you know and love and the world that God so loves, but on behalf of people who haven't even said their first word yet. You know, you are doing this to make a way for people you haven't met who will come behind you.
Yeah, that's something really, really beautiful about that. Thank you, Rhonda. And so, of course, as elections happened in 2019, all three of us were elected to be a part of the Virginia delegation. And so we got together and hung out, and it was time to assign folks to legislative committees. So higher education and superintendency is one of, I think it's 14 legislative committees that are a part of General Conference. So I'm curious, Rhonda, we'll start with you. What has you interested in this particular legislative committee? What was it that made you say yes to this particular team?
Yes, some people who are repeat delegates stay in the same legislative committee and develop real deep expertise and deep relationships with folks who are historically a part of that same committee. I have danced all over a little bit. And what made me interested in higher ed and superintendency is that after about 25 years of serving local churches, prior to retirement, my ministry was in higher education at one of our Virginia United Methodist schools, Shenandoah University. And I think higher ed in general aligns with my desire to support an emerging generation of leaders. And so if there was any expertise I had in higher ed, I wanted to bring it to this committee.
It's beautiful. Thank you. How about you, Andrew? What was it about higher ed and superintendency that got you interested?
Um, Not so much anything in particular, as much as how does this fit in with the bigger picture of the things we want to do and accomplish at General Conference, particularly as associated with regionalization, with revising social principles. And in our case, we're finding on this committee a couple of, or three petitions that are related to neutralizing or removing harmful language, and that's been great to see how we fit in to the big picture.
Yeah, for sure. And so, so y'all have a bunch of petitions before you. I know from reading those, it's a heavy lift. So I wonder, Rhonda, would you just kind of break down for folks? Are there kind of some categories or buckets where it feels like legislation's landing within this legislative committee?
Sure, sure. I want to echo what Andrew said. We really have focused on these three R's. And when we looked at all of our legislation, what we found is that our legislation did not intersect directly regionalization or revising the social principles, but there were, I would say, three petitions that were in that sweet spot for removing language. Some is in the complaint language, some is in the episcopal responsibility, and some is in an area that has to do with civil laws of a country. So we really have honed in there, but that is not the extent of the legislation. There are some petitions about, on the higher ed side, about seminaries, about United Methodist colleges. So there are always people who are wondering who should teach in our institutions, who should be taught, and what and how should that be taught. So we've got some petitions around that. The other side of it, superintendency, we tend to think about, okay, that means district superintendency. Well, not only district superintendency, it's also the general superintendency of the church. So things about episcopal leadership and accountability fall into that category as well. So on episcopal matters, we've got petitions that have to do with how we allocate bishops, when their date of assignments are, what do we do in vacancies? Should deacons be eligible? About peer review, involuntary versus mandatory retirement. We've got some petitions from a long-standing group within the United States, within jurisdictions, who have been studying the episcopacy and have recommendations. I'll come back in a minute, but one of those that has caught our attention is this long-standing issue of term limits on the episcopacy. But similarly, on the district superintendency side of it, there are petitions about how many years of service should deacons be eligible for the superintendency, and where do ecumenical and interreligious responsibilities come up.
So that's a heavy lift. There's a lot there. I'm curious, as you're kind of going through and seeing some of these different proposals, this might be a good time to also elevate the idea of who's able to write petitions. This is something that we've addressed in a couple of our podcasts, but might be important for folks to realize that, hey, petitions are submitted by a wide variety of both people and groups of people. And I wonder if you're noticing in those, in like, so let's take the term limits piece. Are people who are proposing term limits on episcopacy also then writing legislation about district superintendents? Do you find that those are coming from kind of different sources, or how do you see that playing out?
I would say, Andrew, I'll take a stab at this. Would you correct me if
Sure,
if I'm not representing both of us?
sure.
There are some kind of frequent flyer petition writers, and
Got it.
from quadrennium to quadrennium, you get to where you recognize these names. And some of them have broad opinions about a wide variety of things, and some have kind of majored in a particular area. And I think term episcopacy is one of those areas in which some individuals have majored, but not all of the petitions come from an individual. And then what's interesting about that is, all right, so you have, I'll make up a number, 5 petitions about this. You will eventually vote to concur or non-concur with all of them. Any petition that comes to us is due its resolution, usually by consent calendar. So that leaves the committee or even a subcommittee looking at these 5 and saying, all right, which one gets us the closest to where we feel like God would lead the church? And let's start with that one. But even that isn't voted up or down. That just kind of opens that paragraph and allows us to perfect. So we might pick one that opens the paragraph and then say, yeah, but this petition over here that we're going to non-concur with, it has this really sweet phrase that just nails it. So we're going to take that and put that in this. So what can start as 2 people in a local church discussing an issue and saying, hey, we're part of this movement, this Wesleyan movement, let's write it down and send it on, gets to the whole, but in the process, it's worked by a legislative committee and often a subcommittee. So it sometimes starts off as small group work, and then again at general conference becomes small group work again. And I'll say over the years, some of the most rewarding times in general conferences for me has been working in a subgroup with people from around the world, working at a slow pace with mutual translation happening, each trying to speak in simple language so that we can be understood, and coming to that sweet spot where that small group says, yeah, this is what we feel has the fragrance of Christ, and we'll send that on.
And there's probably 3 groups with a major interest in this particular petition related to tenure or time limits. The Global Board of Higher Education and Ministry, the Council of Bishops, and the Jurisdictional Study Committee on the Episcopacy. Obviously, they're having an interest, or will have an interest in where we go with this.
Sure, that's helpful, and all of that I think is such a helpful frame too to remind all of us that, hey, this is not, it's not any one person's work, right? That this is, even if one person comes with a petition, ultimately we collaborate on how implementation of that looks, on how, you know, how we build the language around it, all of that. And so I think that's really helpful. And of course, yeah, and anything that we're talking about in this legislative committee has wide-ranging impact. As you mentioned, Andrew, those particular groups. I can think of, we're recording this, I'm in my office in the United Methodist Conference Center. I imagine the cabinet rooms on the other side of the building for me, I imagine some people that hang out there probably have some interest in this, right? Like it's a wide-ranging kind of space. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, Andrew, maybe we'll start with you on this. As you're thinking about your preparation process. So you're a first-time delegate, Andrew. You know, this is a new space. Kind of, how have you engaged preparation for general conference? How have you, whether it's reading or studying, kind of what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Rhonda a little earlier today. I said, well, I feel like it's a fire hose. That's for me. It's just all just coming right in. But the good news is, in both our legislative committees and our delegation from Virginia, we've got a lot of experience and a lot of people that really care and are glad to share their insights. So it's been a lot of talking to different delegates, and getting their input. It seems like every week, sometimes a couple of days every week, I'm calling somebody and asking them, okay, what do you think about this? And so certainly that interaction and that ability to just kind of share and take it all in is easier when you know if you're not getting it, you got somebody else you can talk to.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. How about you, Rhonda? I'm
That-
interested in your answer to this, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can hear in what Andrew says, and this is true of his character, there's a humility about his character. But I think that is one of the chief characteristics for a good delegate, because we are not the first ones to have thought of these things. You know, we just like when a local church is in a stuck place, a pastor or lay leader can say, "Wait a minute, let's go to Scripture. Where have we seen this before? We're not unique here." Similarly, when working on legislation, we're able to say, "Whoa, these thoughts aren't completely new. God is doing a new thing, but not every thought we have is new." So, for example, on the topic of term limits, which we may or may not even deal with, right? We got bigger fish to fry potentially, but that it doesn't automatically fall into one of the three R's. But if we end up dealing with this, well, somebody shared with me in 2008 a whole long report, a major study that was done about the episcopacy, including term limits. So we're able to look at the past and see the continuity of conversation and holy conferencing over time. So maybe we'll end up saying, gosh, post-affiliation, disaffiliation, we need to deal with this now. Or we might say, wiser to wait until regionalization is in place and then move forward with some of these decisions. So preparation for me is always going back and thinking, where is this coming from? Have we seen this before? Another part of, gosh, y'all, what we do in the Virginia conference, the way our leaders have prepared us, I think I have come to take that for granted, but that is exceptional. Getting together to worship, having individuals present, that's been a big part of our preparation. And I've loved the group that has met online specifically for higher ed and superintendency. I'll tell you what I miss, though, is we do not yet have the input of delegates outside the United States in these conversations. And we are poorer because of it. I know in our committee, our folks have said, we can talk about what qualities we want in leaders for the committee, and we can even throw out some names, but we will not take that step until we are whole. And we are not whole until those folks have been named and until we begin to have relationships, direct relationships, not just assumptions, but direct relationships.
There's such
Another
wisdom.
thing that's been important for me for preparation purposes is the resources available at the Virginia conference website, like videos like this one and the other ones, plus, communications. United Methodist Communications has plenty of things. So there's lots of resources. And when my church asked me to talk about general conference and regionalization, there were plenty of things to go to say, hey, here's a good place to go, and go to these websites and you'll find out a lot about what general conference is all about and what's going to happen this year.
And I think that's first off, thanks for going ahead and pre-plugging what we'll do at the end with our it's via umc.org/GC 2024. Don't worry, we'll say that again in a few minutes. But you're right, having all of those different resources available is so essential. And Rhonda, something I want to make sure folks are aware of is, as you mentioned, the whole idea of, we're sitting here, we're recording this almost exactly 1 month before the beginning of General Conference. It'll be released a little bit closer to General Conference, so we'll see if anything's changed by then. But as of recording, we don't have the full assignment of delegates from around the world to legislative committees, and that has been a really big challenge, I think, for our legislative committee pre-work, in that well, I don't know if on a conference sponsored podcast I can say the full line that this is, but I remember a girl I did in high school, her dad used to say, "Don't assume, because it makes something out of you and me." And so, that's a thing that I think we have to be aware of, is what are our preconceptions and our biases, and trying to check those at the door, because that those often are inhibitors to relationship and to fruit bearing that can come from being together. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, so in a season where we are lamenting and confessing the effects of colonialism and how we've done mission, and we're in the midst of saying, God forgive us, brothers and sisters forgive us, and yet we are still on that territory. Nobody wants it to be that way. That's nobody's conscious choice, but it's so systemic, and being a international denomination is very, very complex and nuanced. So it's quite a juxtaposition to be acknowledging colonialism and confessing it and participating in it all at the same time. It makes me think a little bit like about Romans 7. I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I do want to do. And we're stuck right there with Paul.
And we're the ones who are called to leadership and to model for the church. And so if we in our leadership roles are struggling with this, what does that mean for folks in our local churches, or maybe who are sitting on the sideline saying, "Hey, can I tell you why I don't go to church anymore, or why I don't consider myself part of the faith anymore?" And that becomes part of the larger conversation and narrative that we have to be so attentive to.
And leadership can simply be struggling with it as transparently as possible and in love.
Yeah.
Not pretending we're getting it right, not pretending that we're there yet. Just authentically being in it together.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's a good way to transition to kind of our wrap up for our podcast today. Rhonda, we'll start with you on this. I'm really curious. Let's just envision in our minds that it's May 3rd. Semisonic's closing time is playing in the background, and we're getting ready to leave Charlotte. What's the story that you hope we're telling as we're headed home from Charlotte at the end of General Conference?
Gosh, Jonathan, I hope I have the capacity at that point for narrative. I will say that the closing of General Conferences, in my experience, have often been depleting or exhausting. And I hope this one will be different, but perhaps I'm guarding my heart in a little bit there. If I can push it out farther, I hope that the narrative will be one of faithfulness, that in the midst of all of this, God is doing a new thing, and that we do not perceive it completely. We do not perceive it wholly, but we trust. We trust that it is there. I hope the narrative has both, I hope there's room for celebration, and I hope the celebration is appropriately tempered with our grief. We've been through a lot. And even things like the regionalization and removal of the language and revising the social principles, that will take us a long way. But it doesn't completely overshadow the work that we need to do of healing. And healing enough that when that young person who hasn't taken their first breath yet, for whom we are doing this, that when they come to a United Methodist Church, they are not first hit with the fragrance of dissent and disagreement and disinformation. But when they come through the door, there is the sweet smell. The woman who anointed Jesus' feet, she did what she needed to do in the midst of controversy and confusion. And the smell of that to some was a fragrance of death to death. To other, it is a fragrance of life to life. And so I hope the long-term scent of what we do is sweet and invitational and forward-thinking and a bit of a balm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhonda. Andrew, how about you? When you're do you know if you're driving or flying to to General Conference?
I'm flying in.
Okay. So when you're sitting on that airplane cruising at cruising altitude, what's going to be the story that's going on in your mind?
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to meeting all those people from around the world that are proud to call themselves United Methodists and want to be part of a big table or a big tent. That's an exciting part of being part of this connection. Is just that we want to be from all different visions and all different characters, and that's the beauty of being a worldwide church. I'm hopeful and feeling good about the idea that we can make some significant progress towards inclusion. I'm confident that we'll make some progress in removing or neutralizing harmful language, and certainly making progress with regionalization and allowing each of the new regions to be adaptable, like the current everybody but the United States are. We're the only one that can't do that, and that's what we would like to be able to be part of. And not, if you will, hog all the time at General Conference.
That's helpful and such an important piece of context that there's a piece of the regionalization legislation especially that's really focused on equity, about how we're not taking up so much time on one geography's particularities that we miss out on the opportunity that, it's once every 4 years that we get to speak as a whole, and we want to use that as wisely as we can. So that's I think really helpful frame for that.
I
I wonder,
tell you how many times I've been embarrassed on the hours we have spent on pension at General Conference in a way that only applies to U.S. clergy.
Yeah.
And I want to also mention there's a fourth R that will be very important to people who watch this video. When we come back from General Conference, there will be the work of ratification.
Yeah.
So there are tons of people who will watch this video who are not going to be in Charlotte, but they will be in Hampton when hopefully, or if it gets pushed off a year to another place where the vote will come, and we will need everybody there to ratify this notion of regionalization. I think it was Grace Hahn who did such a wonderful job of explaining how ultimately the vote for ratification is kind of almost more numerical than it is regional. Can you explain that? Can you explain that, Jonathan?
Absolutely. Yeah. So ultimately, just as a reminder, if you haven't been able to tune in previous to this, regionalization is one example of a constitutional amendment. So a vast majority of petitions that come before General Conference are non-constitutional, meaning that they are approved by a simple majority of the whole that's gathered at General Conference. But in the case of something that amends our Constitution, it requires 2/3 of voting delegates to approve whatever the petition is that's before us, and then it goes to the annual conferences. And within those annual conferences, it's 2/3 of the total voting membership of those annual conferences in the year in which that vote is taken. So, for example, what that means is, like in Virginia, we could take a vote. I think we'll have about 2,300 people in attendance between clergy and laity at the upcoming session of the Virginia Annual Conference. So let's say we have 2,000 yeses and 300 nos. But then maybe in another part of the world, let's say the Congo Central Conference at their annual conference sessions, they may have 1,200 people and they have 1,000 yeses and 200 nos or something like that. Well, all of a sudden, then we have a total of 3,000 yeses and a total of 500 nos. And that's where you end up having to see. It doesn't, even though in Virginia, we may have approved it by an 85% margin or something like that. It's about the total aggregate vote, not just one annual conference or a group of annual conferences, what they think it's.
And Jonathan, I might add, we have 1 year to accomplish that.
That's right. Yeah, it's the yeah, and part of my role, this headed into a little bit of the woods, but we can hang out here for a second. A part of my role in our annual conference is that I'm responsible for our annual conference session. So I would forecast that we would be taking that vote this year at annual conference should something pass that requires constitutional amendment and requires ratification from the annual conference. There are other annual conference sessions that, in theory, the way the language is written, it should happen within the year in which the vote is taken. So some annual conference sessions meet, within a couple of weeks of general conference ending. We have about 6 weeks. There's some that won't meet until the fall. So, that's why there's such a variety of opportunity there. But certainly an important nuance to be able to share about all of this. I wonder, do y'all have any kind of closing thoughts? I know, Andrew, when we were kind of talking before we hit record, you had mentioned something that you might want to share about a kind of a closing thought with us.
Yeah, sure. Oftentimes when I'm consulting our delegates, I would ask them a question, and how do they think, I'd say, well, how do you think that's going to turn out? And very often I would get the answer, well, I'm very hopeful. And after I got a few of those from a bunch of our delegates, I realized that hopeful is an important word to distinguish from, say, optimistic. That is, we need to know, as part of our faith, what hopeful means. And Hebrews 11:1 tells us that faith is believing in what we hope for and being certain of what we do not see. So believing in what we hope for is really important to Christians, and I think it's a wonderful word to use for how we feel about what's going to happen at General Conference.
Awesome. I love that. And what a good word to end on. I so appreciate that, Andrew, and that prevailing thought. And I hope we will all bring that spirit of hope that's more than optimism, that's really grounded in the work of the Holy Spirit that'll be in and through the delegates that are meeting in Charlotte, as well as all those who are there to observe, and all the many United Methodists around the world that'll be praying over this time and will be anticipating this time that's happening very, very soon. So unfortunately, we think Rhonda's battery died, and so she dropped off. But we say thank you to her. Andrew, thank you to you for being a part of this conversation today. For those who are listening or watching, just a reminder that you can access all of the General Conference preparation that we're working on for the Virginia Annual Conference at vaumc.org/GC 2024. There are videos and podcasts, infographics, links, and all sorts of things that are there and ready for you to be able to access in whatever form is most helpful to you. It looks like we got Rhonda's battery came back to life, so we can testify to the resurrection. Amen. But Rhonda, thank you so much for being here today. Andrew, thank you for being here today. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your prayers and your support. We'll be back again real soon with another edition of Before Conference Conversations. But until then, be well, take good care. God bless you, and we'll connect again real soon.
Thanks for having us.